We've been talking a lot about AM radio, the radio itself being important, especially in emergencies. And so that's where our theme is going to be. We are generously supported by Broadcast Depot. And Mary, it's your turn. Tell us what's new.
We've got several things going on. We did a promotion for the new Angry Audio Smooth, which is the mic processor for the SM7. We also have we have RVR transmitters in stock. I know we did a promo on that. And then we have a podcasting promo going on. So check us out. Lots of those are on our webpage, or you can find us on Facebook too.
Very good. Thank you very much. And we appreciate your support. What could I say? Everybody is talking about Lahaina, Maui. And what seems to happen every time a disaster occurs that is unusual, people said the sirens never went off. Reports that I've read in the newspapers are that many government officials in Maui got alerts about the fires from the radio stations. I'm not sure that any EAS was run, but the radio stations were taking phone calls from people and sharing that information in real time, while a number of government bureaucrats were planning formal news conferences. I guess that's the polite way of saying it. There was 100% cell loss in the city of Lahaina. 6 days out, there was still 99% no cell service. And this is difficult. But we've seen this over and over again. You could list them: Boulder, Colorado, Paradise, California. The sheriff's department said, well, we used reverse 911. The fact that the phone lines were either burned or the cell sites were down or the power was out, that really didn't occur to them to turn to radio. New Orleans, Katrina. On the other hand, you had stations like WWL that were so prepared with their generators and their staff moving into whatever studios they could get into and keep going. Their only problem was that certain sheriff's departments tried to intercept the diesel fuel that was being brought in to try to keep WWL on the air. Another story, isn't it? Here in Tucson, we had a fire in the Catalina Mountains. Went right up the side on the south side of the mountains and then started down the north side toward a little town called Oracle, which happens to be the city of license for one of our local stations. And the station that was the owner at that time, well, they were not really warning the people of Oracle about the danger of the fire headed their way. They were playing the hits on automation. And that was it. They were playing it off a repeater, and Oracle never heard what was happening to them, at least not from their local station. Some of the state leaders in Hawaii have already been criticized. They began criticizing the power department, electrical company. Sparks may have been the issue there. There's got to be an awful lot of afterthought in this thing. But it's very frustrating. It's frustrating for people that want information and don't know how to get it if the station isn't live on the air. And this is a whole part of the discussion we can have as we go along. Should radio stations be allowed to run automated 24 hours a day in the middle of a disaster? Okay. I'm going to allow anyone that wants to contribute to this discussion. You can raise your hand by clicking on the little raise hand thing. You can send me a chat note here. or you can unmute yourself with an alternate A and talk to us. But the contrast is clear. It depends on where you're from. For instance, in Redding, California, which is that area where Paradise burned down in a while ago, the police chief actually came to the radio station and thanked them because he got more information from the radio station than he got through official channels. Another reader wrote in, and the tornado hit western Massachusetts and destroyed much of several small towns. And this particular person, every radio station he checked, AM or FM, nothing. They're all playing the hits automated. We've seen a few of these EAS alerts that go out to evacuate an entire county. One just happened up in Oregon recently. We had one down here, Cochise County, which is the southeast portion of the state. It turns out it was a fire in a little town called Cochise Stronghold, but the DPS flagged it as evacuate the county, which is much larger than most people would have thought. Some years ago, we had a 1,000-year flood here, and that 1,000-year flood elicited no response from the county, although the broadcast community had gifted them with a VHF system to reach into every radio station newsroom. And, they didn't see that as very important. Two more things I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to Rich Parker. In New Mexico, there is currently an effort with the Department of Homeland Security there to educate the PIOs because some of their recent alerts have been very, very difficult to understand. For instance, there was an EAS activation that said, evacuate immediately, get your drugs and go. Well, wait a minute. Didn't say where that was or what the problem was by a fire or what drugs they were really talking about. Here's another one, again from New Mexico. They had an Amber Alert. No information is available about the license plate number. No information is available about the abductor's automobile. No information is available about the abductor's direction of travel. As was pointed out, that is not actionable information. And so you really have a problem here. Rich, let's turn to you and see what's on your mind first.
Oh, I just wanted to add that one of the big problems that they have in Anchorage is over alerting. So when there's a tsunami warning, even though Anchorage is technically on the coast, there's a port there, it's almost extremely unlikely that it would ever experience the effects of a tsunami. But the problem is that it's like the polygons, the FIPS, everything is so screwed up that they can't get a fine enough thing. And I know that the National Weather Service has been trying to get better, polygons and FIPS, but they're not even CAP compliant. And the whole thing is just a big CF. And it's really a problem because they had one situation where people were like racing up the road out of Anchorage into high ground. And I think someone actually was injured or killed. And it's the stupidest thing because it's not our fault as broadcasters. This is a deeper problem that needs to get fixed. So that's my take on it. I will say that we have an asteroid warning system that has one of its telescopes on Maui. That thing is costing several million dollars to do, but they can't seem to find the funds to get National Weather Service CAP compliant. I mean, it's just the chances of a meteor hitting are so rare, but the chances of a fire or a flood or a tsunami they happen every year, and yet they can't figure out how to. So it's just a problem that somebody higher up it's got the, you know, the cojones to take care of it, needs to do it.
That said, what would be your impression of cooperation from the local emergency management officers? Are they communicating with you, or are they holding back?
No, I mean, they're doing their best to try to communicate, but the systems that they have, they can't easily send out, for instance, a tsunami alert that doesn't over alert because of the way that the FIPS and things are constructed. I mean, they try to tell people, and they tell radio stations. I mean, EAS is very important in Alaska, but it's just a nightmare. We'll probably talk about it at the ABA in November. But it's just a really untenable situation.
Yeah.
And that's just one of many problems. I mean, NWS is so important, and they don't have funding. I mean, they have transmitters that are off the air all the time in really important locations. So you know, why is there no money going to that? I mean, we're being fined and badgered, and you know, in Alaska, we got to spend thousands and thousands. I'm sorry, I don't take this personally. We got to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to upgrade our systems just to comply with an FCC mandate that happens before we can even get our funding from the CPB grants to do the updates. You know, it's just, there's no communication. It's just a CF.
It's a little difficult, yes. Ed, let's turn to you.
Well, bunch of thoughts here. Maybe I'll pop in and out with comments. Focusing back in on Hawaii at the 30,000-foot level. We're still gathering information. The finger pointing game has started already, just like it did with the missile incident, just as it did with California, the wildfires. You know, the sirens didn't go off, arguably for a good reason, a plausible one, that the sirens are on the coast and people are trained to evacuate the hills. So if they issued the sirens, then people would be evacuating to hills where the wildfires were. I don't know if I fully buy that logic, but that's an explanation why the sirens didn't go off. WIA had serious problems, as far as we can tell at this point, between cell phone and internet outages and then the usual ghost in the machine of WIA, where, you know, even here on a normal day in Northern Virginia, I have 6 cell phones in my household. We recently had a flash flood notice, and only one of the 6 devices got the WIA message. Identical devices on the same carrier, Verizon, but only one of 6 got the WIA message. So, you know, on a bad day like Hawaii, you know, I think there needs to be a serious postmortem of WIA's challenge in that. And then we come to EAS. And from what I can tell, and again, I'm just gathering information now, but from what I can see, messages were posted to IPAWS. There were WIA wildfire and evacuation messages posted to IPAWS in CAP, but they went through the WIA channel. I don't immediately see anything that went through the EAS channel. Hopefully one of the Hawaiian broadcasters can post whether or not they received anything, but there was no OTA EAS relay that we know of. There was no CAP message push for any of these messages to broadcasters. And the messaging, Barry, you referred to, really related to crowdsourcing information from local people on what was going on, which can be unreliable. That's, you know, these are non-authenticated sources. And then you had authorities listening into this information. So I also heard reports of broadcasters literally begging local officials to give the information to get over the air, radio and television. So this was, to me, a mass breakdown in the instant command system. This was a mass breakdown in the public information role and the emergency alerting role that should be a standard play for a state emergency management operation. I don't want to point, you know, all the fingers at the authorities, but something very, very badly went wrong, and a lot of people lost their lives. I grimaced, you know, Rich, you were talking about the transmitter. I was just waving that off. I don't even want to care about how many millions they spent on that. People, you know, lost their lives, lost their property. And a minor point for me, and again, Rich mentioned bad timing, or, you know, just a confluence of timing here. I just want to make mention here on the back right on the tails of this Hawaii disaster, where, as we just said, EAS was not utilized or didn't work because it was not utilized. I'm going to get here. I got a meeting. I got an invite from FEMA came out this morning. When Minutes Matter, Alert and Warning Community of Practice webinar. Agenda, FCC update, proposed rules relating to wireless emergency alerts. National Weather Service updates and migrations to NWS Chat 2.0. IPAWS wireless emergency alerts updates. End agenda. Where the heck is EAS? Where the heck is EAS? Why, we've got national authorities not reinforcing the need to use every tool at their disposal if it is truly an integrated public warnings, alert and warning system. We got state and local officials who don't even think of using EAS a lot of times. Point back to Northern Virginia again. They almost never use EAS. It's always WIA in the National Capital Region. So what the heck are we doing here? As I saw somebody say on the EA, and Rich, it was probably you again, Rich Parker, that, what the heck are we doing spending all this amount of money on EAS? Well, I think these are valid expenditures. There is a community obligation for a broadcaster. But the tools are not being exercised properly. They're not being tested, not being trained, and they're not being funded properly. Leaving aside the whole CPB funding thing, which I think is going to be an interesting mess. The amount of money going into public alert and warning in this country is disgustingly small at any level. The entire operational budget of FEMA is donut money compared to what's going on in other programs. And it just astounds me. So, why can't anything happen here? Why isn't anything happening here? Well, you guys are broadcasters. You've got a loud voice, big transmitters.
The problem starts out with what you were just saying here, unfunded mandates. The broadcasters are required to do EAS. Required. They're fined if they don't do that. They're fined if they don't keep the records. The emergency managers, on the other hand, are asked to cooperate, and that's about the level of it, isn't it? And so sometimes it's an issue where the emergency management thinks of the broadcaster as an enemy and doesn't want to cooperate, doesn't want to give information. Maybe it's the way that a particular bureaucracy works. Richard Rudman had a thought here that he wanted to share with us, and so I'm going to pop him in here right now.
Okay, and I've entitled this way: is it them and us, or is it just us together? I would not describe the relationship between our industry and the government emergency management community as them and us as tortured. It's more like arm's length or non-existent. If you do not know them, how can they know you? Here are a few things about this type of relationship I've learned after almost 40 years of working with emergency managers all over the country, some of whom have become close friends even. The reputation of some stations as being good news sources bears a direct relationship to how easy it is or isn't to build a working relationship. Was the fact I was the DOE for a leading all news station in Los Angeles a leg up when I started talking to Los Angeles County and the city of Los Angeles about emergency public information and EAS? Darn right it was. Here are some factors standing in the way of good relationships between emergency management community and us. First, there's still a lot of emergency managers who come out of law enforcement where their day job is controlling information and even keeping information away from nosy news people. Many find it difficult to change their attitudes and tones when emergencies require giving life-saving information to the public. When you meet someone in this field for the first time, take their day job into account if they appear to be cool to you. We've seen emergencies all over the country where EAS was available but not used. The new bright and shiny public warning objects like Z, aka Twitter, a wide range of other social media, WEA, cell phone alerts, and such, have really captured the attention of many in the emergency management community who've somehow forgotten that the first things that happen in major emergencies are losses of utility power, cell service, and internet. Relating this to Maui or some of our huge California wildfires, wind-driven fires destroy cell towers, and the incredible heat melts fiber links and high-tension utility power interconnect circuits. What I say to groups of broadcasters at EAS meetings is this: the day of the emergency is a bad day to go and meet local emergency managers for the first time. The successful local and state EAS committees have carefully built relationships over the years. I can pretty much tell you what the EAS success rate in each area is like once I know if there's an active local committee of some type or not. The other bit of advice I will offer is to go online to the FEMA site and take their series of online courses on what's called incident management that the FEMA offers so you can talk their language. Emergency management nationwide uses standard terms and procedures outlined in what's called the National Incident Management System, or NIMS. And you see the links to various courses on the screen right now. And thank you, Barry. If you have a visitor touring your station who has a ham call or knows the difference between Class A, B, and C amplifiers, you're much more likely to strike up a relationship. Same thing holds true if you walk into your local emergency management office and speak their language. Finally, many local emergency management agencies purchase the same EAS boxes we have in our stations. The difference is we know how to program and maintain them, and they do not. EAS technical assistance being offered should be right there on top in your bag of tricks. So I do not see the relationship as them and us during major declared emergencies. At those times, we are just all at sea in the same leaky boat, trying to get to a safe harbor. That's it.
That's it. We thank Mr. Rudman for that. Bill Robertson, you have your hand up, so I'll turn to you first.
I'm going to unmute and I'm going to try my video. I'm on a very,
Hello.
I'm on a very tight bandwidth line, but anyway, actually, I had my hand up and then you did the Richard stuff, and Richard actually nailed one of the main points I wanted to make, is the fact that everyone is wowed by this shiny new object, WEA, and everything in it. Oh, it's supposed to work and it does all these wonderful things. And our, if you will, part of the problem with EAS is it's old. You know, it's a rotary phone in a digital world. So the idea of the fact that it is still robust, it works in all of these different situations. It's broadcast, which means it can cast a very wide net across things, which also can be kind of a problem. We talked about this, about how do you narrow that and how do we get some of the things to be a little bit more descriptive for a particular area. But again, when you look at this, what I look at is, if I'm an archer, I want to have a number of different arrows in my quiver. I want to be able to do that. And you want to be able to use all of those. And instead of just pulling out one, you want to be able to use all of those things at your disposal. Now, the second thing I was going to make, and this is probably, I'm going to be cast as a heretic on this thing, but I will still point this out. I really believe that one of our problems here is we have a test, not very frequently, on a national level, and then we talk about all the things that didn't work. Well, the idea of a test is to do that, is to test and find out what works. What I find most ridiculous is a system as complex as this. When you talk about the sheer number of steps, a number of devices, up, down modulation, transmitters, everything, not even talking about our equipment, our EAS equipment, all of the other little pieces that have to be in play, and you test it once a year. I've always contended that we should be testing this more frequently. Now, Here, again, I'm not trying to be a heretic here and get cast out. I think part of it is obviously how onerous the testing has become. This Form 1, Form 2, Form 3 things just adds more complexity to a thing, when really what we should be doing is, did you get it? Did it work? Okay, you get another chance. And by the way, the NPT doesn't have to be national. It's a standard EAS protocol that we could do the Western United States, central mountain states, Eastern, and then maybe once a year do a full national test. But we could at least regionalize these and find out. And that's a critical thing about this, is I think our testing is insignificant in the amount of complexity of a particular system like this. I know as an engineer, if I develop something like this and I could only test it once a year, it's going to take me a long time to get everything right. That's the whole idea of the testing. So I would kind of say that some of this onerous evaluation things, and when we look at it, we say, oh, it didn't work. No, you test it. That's why you test, is to find out what you need to do to fix. And ideas, I think, is Richard's absolutely right. I did a lot of work with the Sedgwick County, Kansas folks, and they were very tight. They actually, at an SBE meeting, we invited the emergency management guy to show up at that meeting, and there was a great collaboration. And that's one of the things. Make sure they recognize that it's not just this shiny object, but you stand in support of your community. So
it definitely can be. Thank you. It definitely can be. I'd also like to mention that Al Kenyon, give him credit, when of course, they don't call it National Periodic Test anymore. We have to change. NPT is now Test of the Emergency Alert System, and EAN is not EAN anymore. But back when we first got FEMA online, they ran a test and they were all set to stop. And Richard and I, we screamed loudly. That's why there is a weekly test from the FEMA, at least when they remember to keep their certificate up to date. Mr. Wood, what could we gather from you?
The last city I lived in, I moved out of there about a year ago. I was a member of CERT, Community Emergency Response Team, and we were required to take several FEMA tests. Not any of them, as I can recall, mention anything at all about broadcasters. It was all kind of internal, the structure and that sort of thing, but nothing about dealing with the media.
Rich Parker writes here about how the Alaska EM folks cooperate well and issues RMT pretty religiously. This is something, again, that I've mentioned before. We don't need, as Bill says, one NPT a year. Every month, each state should know how many stations in that state got the test. We don't need the NPT to know how far our testing system works. But is there an operating SCCC or an LECC? I haven't heard from a Southern Arizona LECC in 3, 4, 5 years now. And I know many of the SCCCs, which are volunteer groups, have had their time making up a state plan that the FCC demanded last year and is still slowly vetting. It's a hard thing. But what I'd like to direct a little bit here is the original thing that I posted. Is radio competent to do this job? Now, we could talk, as I did a moment ago, about automation, the lack of newsrooms in radio stations anymore. But the one thing that we hear from Rich and Ed and others and Mr. Parker, you've got to have a relationship of some sort with the government EMs. Now, some of them aren't going to cooperate. We know that. But where does that relationship build? Is it the engineer's responsibility? Is it the IT department's responsibility? Whose responsibility is it? What do you think? Anyone have an opinion?
All of the above.
Yes, correct. Tell me about WR. Now, I've read a lot of posts from a certain individual who basically has said EAS in New York is a joke. Why is it a joke? Because the coverage area of the broadcast facilities is so large, and there are so many jurisdictions, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, that if a storm came through, you'd be all EAS all the time. What was your policy on dealing with the EAS at WR?
That was some time ago. I don't remember a lot of it. I do remember the original, and I've mentioned this before, that was, it was suffered by all of New York's radio stations. When the first test was done, the originating station was WQXR. And at that point, I believe that most stations just hardwired this in so that whenever something happened, it took control. Well, WQXR forgot the end of message. And every station in New York was now playing classical music. That was quickly changed, as it was immediately changed as people rushed for patch bays. But the whole idea of a station the size of WOR and its coverage, it's awfully tough to limit it. And are you going to deal with amber alerts that come through from 100 miles away? Yes, we reach there, but that isn't our primary coverage. So it's very tough. The bigger the station is, the tougher it is to, it would really, I think at this point, have to go through the news director to make a decision, news director and the program director, to make a decision on which ones to carry. But by that time, it's probably too late.
Well, that's a good point. Yes. Rich, you mentioned National Weather Service, and I've dealt with some very fine folks at NWS, but you're right, they're a silo. They have not become compliant with CAP. And in the main, nothing that happens from the Weather Service gets over onto the main system. But then again, we do realize that the FEMA IPAWS CAP system is largely a national emergency. Local emergencies are not really the jurisdiction of EAS. Not really. I mean, we use the system, can use the system, but does it help? We're in monsoon season here. And I tell the story. We had a severe storm warning every 10 minutes for an hour. Every 10 minutes. The last one saying essentially, there is a severe storm warning 5 miles northwest of Tucson and moving west. At which point the program director came into my office and said, I don't want to run any more of those ever again. So who's shooting who in the foot? Broadcasters? Can't blame that one on the Weather Service. Or should broadcasters not take these EAS alerts live? They should transcribe them and voice them locally. Anybody out there that does that? Or is everybody running automated all the time? Is that what's wrong with the system?
Well, at WOR, we weren't automated at all.
No, I meant the EAS box.
No, I believe that the box, Tom Ray would be the person to, tell us about that. But, it's just very difficult. I've got several radios that include weather service, the weather service broadcasts. Only one is sensitive enough to receive it. The transmitter is probably about 40 miles away. And I think it may be, 250 watts. So only the one that has an outdoor antenna receives them. So, unfortunately, that particular one doesn't have the same, SAME capability.
Yeah, we go around and around here. The NWS, of course, is putting out partial county alerting. And the only radio station in West Pima County cannot hear any National Weather Service system. I said, guys, could you put something down an internet line? Could you give them some audio? Well, that was about 9 months, 10 months ago. Can't be done. Not invented here. Ed?
Barry, hey, thanks. So I had to switch phones to mobile mode. Couple of thoughts here. Just one anecdote and one more global thought. Anecdote. It was a day or two ago here in the Washington, D.C. area, there was a major flash flood warning issued by National Weather Service. WTOP News, yes, I do listen to radio. WTOP News broke into their programming with, the newscast with, we just saw something in the National Weather Service about flash flood warning, and when the EAS ready, will likely do an EAS. And then the same newscaster, they played the tones, and the same newscaster live read through the entire, voluminous message from National Weather Service. Obviously, somehow they got the cat version of it and read out that entire message, which did go a little bit beyond 2 minutes. And then they manually played the end of message tones. So a lot of interesting things to talk about. I don't want to bunny home, but this newscaster did the voiceover in their own voice as an LP1. They kind of did their own plug-in inside of it, and it did exceed the 2 minutes. So I'm not sure how that worked out in this DMA, but that's one thing these guys did as a live transcription, as you were suggesting for an urgent EAS. And like I said, EAS is very rarely used in the National Capital Region. This one was particularly relevant for a couple of hours. Now, having said that, global comment, as many radio stations move to fully automated environments, that's obviously, unless you're running a 24/7 newsroom, that's transcription is not an option. So the ability of the EAS box to be programmed to do an interrupt for certain events when they truly matter, perhaps combined with what we call virtual hybrid solutions, but backhauling information back to the hub, controlling all these stations, where even potentially you could re-record and insert the alert back into the device at the local station level. Not into the stream at the hub, but hub and spoke. You're at the hub. You're activating one of the spokes with your own transcription. Make decision of what alerts to air from a central node. These things are all doable today. I don't think live transcription alerts are doable for the vast majority of broadcasters. Those days have frankly come and gone, except for news radio. But for live news radio at the local level, even news radio is becoming centrally distributed. My basic point here is that technology is there to do a lot better with EAS. It's just a matter of organization and will.
Yeah, the good point. And again, you think about how these things are put together. Chuck Conrad just said NWS is frequently down in his area. They don't even know if their transmitter is on. Ouch. One of the things you think about too, when we're thinking about the radio station industry, streaming, podcasts, social media, as Richard Rudman said, there are so many tools, or maybe Mr. Robertson said the same thing. So many tools out there now that maybe we don't need to have radio. Wait a minute. When the power goes out and the cell sites come down, what is wideband going to do for you, or cell phones, or streaming? This is an area the broadcasters have a unique position, and yet the NAB is worried about having AM radios in cars, not whether you can hear anything on those AM radios because of the RFI from electric vehicles. And they don't want to push EAS. Why? Because the owners and the GMs don't want to talk about EAS, and the program directors don't want EAS on their air. So here radio has a unique ability to reach their communities in a way that nobody can't do it on the telephone, can't do it on the newspaper. The TV station is going to be down if there's no power, no TV is running. The radio's there in the car, wherever. And yet radio resists being part of their community. Now, Chuck, you're probably a good one to respond to this because you operate radio stations. There's others here that do it. Please speak up.
I do. And you know, what really bugs me is that I'm on a first name basis with a guy named Mike at Shreveport NWS and going, you know, we can't pick you up today. And he finally referred me to a supervisor in Fort Worth, who apparently is where all this comes out of eventually. And I said, hey, I've got a 500-foot radio tower. You want to put one of your transmitters on it? And he said, well, we don't have the money to do that. I said, well, I don't know about that. He said, but we can't afford the rent because we rent from American Towers. I'm going, well, I'm not talking about American Towers kind of prices. I was thinking maybe you'd cover the electric bill or something. But he didn't seem very excited about that. And my transmitting tower is right next to a recreational lake. I mean, you can see it from there. And there's a whole bunch of boats out there. And I kind of think those guys would like to know if the big squall is coming in to so go head for the shore. But that's half the time we don't get it. This morning I got woken up by my cell phone for a blue alert, which I hadn't really thought of that before, about 5 in the morning for something in Houston, which is about a 4-hour drive from me. Apparently somebody held up a 7-Eleven or something and the cops were looking for him. That was really useful. I'm glad it didn't interrupt our radio. It's a fine line. I mean, I don't see how small radio stations can afford to have somebody there all the time. That's just not going to happen. I mean, if that's going to be a requirement, then a lot of stations are going away, which might not be a bad thing, but that's the economics aren't there to have somebody there all the time. But it seems like you could automate this system. NWS, actually, VHF radio works. You know, ham radio people who do this all the time. I don't have trouble picking up on a ham rig, you know, on 2 meters or something from 30, 40 miles away with a decent antenna. The guy from NWS told me that they have to have a 10-bay antenna on their tower. I went, 10-bay antenna? Are you kidding me? How about a whip? You know, a ground plane off the side, you know, that'd work.
What do you do, Chuck, if there's an alert after hours when you're not in the office and the automation is just churning away? Do you just rely on the automatic takeover, or do you
generally,
respond?
unless it's something really crazy, like when we had Hurricane Rita? Now the good news is I live about 300 feet away from the studio, so yeah, I've gone down there at 5 in the morning or 3:30 in the morning or something. When all hell was breaking loose. We had a really bad storm here this spring. The city of Kilgore was without power for 4 days. Cell phones didn't work. Nothing worked. We have generators. We were on the air at least partially. not everything that I've got has a generator on it because there's a lot of translators involved and they're on other people's property who don't want to know about a generator. But at least we were on the air, and quite a few of the other bigger stations, including 2 of the TV stations, were off the air because they didn't have power. For some reason, one of the TV studio stations around here has a standby generator at the transmitter site, but they don't at the studio.
Well, they can broadcast to carrier and turn it on off in Morse code.
The next 8 hours of Black are brought to you by Bob's Funeral Home. I mean, it seems a little silly to me. I mean, maybe the other way around, because so many of things are fed by cable or direct TV or Dish Network or whatever. Of course, they get that signal off the air too.
So if there is an emergency and you're 300 feet away, how do you know about it?
Well, ham radio.
Oh, the station doesn't call you?
Nobody calls me. I mean, well, people call going, who was that was just singing or something like that? But no, I've never got a call from any kind of authority figure saying, "Hey, would you really broadcast this?" Now they might want us to broadcast something about their fish fry they're having next Friday. There's a fundraiser. But,
what about your EAS box? Will it tell you that there's a severe storm warning?
Yeah, all the time.
By email, text?
Well, no, but it goes off. I have the thing on in my house all the time, so I can hear it in the background. And when you hear the duck farts, you know something's going on. I actually have a monitor in my kitchen that shows what the automation's doing. So, and has off-air audio feeding the thing. So,
well, see, the folks at Digital Alert Systems have gone to great lengths to build a system that's so flexible that you can be alerted, or your program director can be alerted, or any number of people when there is a situation. And yet, as I mentioned, here in Western Massachusetts, was that you, Rich, that had actually set that in originally, or at any rate that no radio station was running?
Yeah, that was me. There's nothing. And the other issue, for me, I'm now in a smaller market in Western Mass, but in New York, as you mentioned, that we cover so many different areas that, if we had this thing hardwired, as it would originally was, we'd have no regular programming because it would take over several times an hour probably. And for things that, are not important to Manhattan, let's say, a lost child in northern, or, let's say really in Pennsylvania, isn't going to be important to the city of New York. So there's got to be some way to filter the, I don't want to say unimportant, but the less relevant stuff to the market, to filter those out. And, in my case, you mentioned, I mentioned newsrooms. What's that? In my market, I have called both radio and TV stations in this market. It's a Springfield, Mass market. And I've identified myself as someone, in the broadcast industry. And I get forwarded to voicemail every single time. I have not been able to get in touch with anyone directly. And, in the early days of iBuzz, I would call stations to say, hey, it's off the air. And no response. So, getting in touch with radio stations is almost impossible. Like at WOR, everybody answered their phones. And, people were, not only did we answer the phones in the office, but on the air. So,
well, yeah, you were a talk radio station, so you better answer your phone on the air.
Yes. But it's, it's just, it amazes me, radio of any kind without a live newsroom is useless.
Oh.
It's
The commission gave that away, what, 25 years ago?
so other than, even WOR now does not really have a newsroom where there are actually people on the street gathering news. It's basically, from networks and, actualities came from ABC and Mutual. But nobody on the street gathering news. The only relevant radio stations in the city were WINS, WCDS, and maybe WBBR, because they were all news 24/7. And I even question, all news stations, whether or not they actually have overnight live news. We did not. We carried Mutual news overnight. So, what do you do? The station was manned all the time. But, and there was an automation system there, but it was really live assist. Always had a tech or an engineer, on duty. But in my market, forget about it. It's just, I don't know of any station in the market that actually has a dedicated news department.
Wow. George, you mentioned you've got to go, but you'd like to program your boxes to carry center things automatically, like tornado warnings. What EAS receiver are you using?
You can do that on most of them. You just check off which events you want to forward and which ones you don't. That's the simple way for that.
George may have already left, but
I know I've got a DAS deck and I have it programmed so it doesn't, the tsunami warnings in East Texas are not really real relevant, so it's not going to rebroadcast those. But, as you point out, one of the problems is that there's very few people at any radio stations. I mean, I think there's 36 stations in this market. There's one that has people here well, actually, we have somebody there during the daytime, but not at night. But I don't think any of them have anybody there at night, including the PBS station. University of Texas just fired up an FM station. It's a NPR station in Tyler. And there's a very nice gentleman who does interviews with people. And I was over there. They actually interviewed me because of the Broadcast Museum. And it's running on full automation, getting feeds from NPR and so on, using their software. But otherwise there's nobody there. Now maybe if something happened, he could interrupt the programming if he happens to be there. But that's just kind of the way it is. And most of the stations around here are owned by large groups like Town Square, who apparently has 5 formats, no waiting, and that's where every Town Square station has one of those formats. Alpha Media owns a bunch of stations here. They're pretty much the same way. That's kind of what you get. Either that or it's the little guys like me that are trying to do something, but you can't be everything. So,
is there an all-news station in Dallas?
Yeah, there's a couple of them actually. KRLD and WBAP both. And I think WBAP is the entry point for North Texas part. But boy, by the time we get their broadcast, their alerts sent down the pipe, it's 3rd or 4th generation. It sounds like pressed duck shit or something. It's just amazing. But at least they're there, and they will interrupt our programming, and that's fine.
well, that's another aspect that stations don't want to spend a dime on EAS. They don't buy the box. They've spent their $3,000 or whatever, and that's it. They don't want to do anymore. And unless there is some sort of funding or some sort of arrangement or education, I was going to ask Bill, but Bill had to jump off for another meeting, and I think we lost Ed too. Wouldn't you say that there ought to be a group of broadcasters to go around to educate stations and agencies on how to program these things?
Well, that's certainly something the State Broadcast Association could do. I don't know that they have the wherewithal to do it. All this stuff takes time, money, and labor, and it's all volunteers. And frankly, I think until somebody's actually paid to administer this stuff, it's going to be just what it is.
How about the SBE? Is this something the SB could or should be doing?
Well, they could, but do they have the wherewithal or the interest to do it? I mean, it's going to cost a bunch of money, and you know, frankly, if your government wants this done, maybe they ought to be the ones doing it. Of course, we know what happens when the government starts doing stuff. You know, be careful what you ask for because you may get it.
Yeah. I think there's a good example of what Rich and I were talking about WOR on the YouTube. It's a video cut or audio cut. I think it's studio video of WLS in Chicago, and they were dealing with a snowstorm, which was snarling traffic. And they were giving out information about where the traffic was backed up and problems and accidents. And all of a sudden, duck farts in a pre-recorded message that there was a snow event took over.
I like that. That was a real surprise. It's snowing outside. It was great.
Yeah. Yeah. And you look at that, and then the other thing, and I think Ed talked about this very briefly, it was on the edge, and that was the FIPS problem, the county problem. And in my way of thinking, a major problem with EAS altogether, because the national, they don't care. But if you're driving down Highway 2590 and they tell you that there is a storm on the north corner of Miller County headed toward Humboldt County, what good does EAS do you? You could be driving right into a tornado.
Not much unless you know where you are and they're familiar with the territory, and that's true. I mean, they give, you know, they first of all, we have the synthesized voice that mispronounces most of the names of towns and cities around here. And if you don't happen to know where they are, you know, when it says that there's a tornado coming through Stewart, and you go, where in God's name is Stewart? It doesn't do you much good. It really doesn't.
Now, I know the DASDEC has the ability to prepend or postpend an audio cut to an alert, so that if that alert says that there is a storm in Fundy County, they can say, we're here in Christown. And you can figure out from there where it is.
Maybe. I don't really see that that's all that useful, to be honest. Maybe you can figure out how to do it. But how would you append the thing with something that was actually meaningful when you hadn't heard the alert yet?
Well, that's a good question. It could be used for several things, one of which is a translation into another language, Spanish, Native American.
Yeah, I suspect that's what it was actually intended for, was for translation.
No, it could be used. It could be used for a commercial. You
Oh,
could,
yeah, I guess
you know,
so.
this alert brought to you by Chuck Conrad and his musical dwarfs.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Get those dwarfs out of here. But the point I'm getting at is that it's so important for radio to tell people what's going. There's a fire on the island of Maui. Well, a large part of Maui wasn't endangered at all. And certain parts of Maui were beyond, if you saw the television, you saw the line of cars where people were literally burned to death in a traffic jam. Now, time is difficult in places like that, or in Paradise, when you only have a few minutes to get the word out. But to say there's an evacuation order for Maui County or whatever, That's just too imprecise. And I go back to the core question here. Is radio competent to handle disasters if all it does is relay automatically the codes from the Weather Service or the FEMA?
No,
tend to think it isn't competent to do it in the current system. And it's pretty much a waste of time. And I'm sorry it's that way, but that just occurs to me the way it seems to be working out.
Ray
Yep.
Vaughn, that's a great idea, telling people what mile marker on what highway. That is smart. Congratulations to WIBW. Someone else started to talk and I cut him off, and I'm sorry.
That was probably me.
Oh, okay.
Saying, well, I don't think in its current state radio is competent to do this, not without some serious revamping. And I don't know that that's going to happen.
But the key thing is you've got to have live people to do this. You've got to have pre-planning. You've got to have some effort to service the public. Now, again, and I think I said this at the beginning, large majority of us here today are on the tech side or the IT side. Now you got to get buy-in from the EMs. You got to get buy-in from the general managers and the program directors. And then you have the situations like Rich Wood says, in some cities, in some areas, it's just impractical to try to do everything. Where do you draw the line?
everybody needs a 2-meter ham radio. I'm part of Skywarn, and there are dozens upon dozens of people driving around looking for stuff like this. That's where I get a lot of my emergency information, and of course from TV for weather stuff, because they've all got radar. You know, and I was the person who, you know, had mentioned the problem in the tornado in Springfield, Mass. There was nothing, and you know, it just, you know, I'm in the business for 45 years, and it just embarrassed the daylights out of me that no one was, and you know, then somebody else, you know, on the broadcast list said, "Oh, you know, just a bunch of roof tiles," and it turns out that he had flown a plane over the area and contributed to Wikipedia with some photos. And I've known this person since 1960, but you know, I don't understand the comment of, you know, just roof tiles. But you know, Skywarn was all over that tornado, and we've had threats of tornadoes since. And this is an area that doesn't usually get them, but there's always somebody on the road, some ham on the road, watching for this stuff. And you know, it's if everybody had that receiver, you know, you've got, don't have to worry about you know, any system. You don't have to worry about a newsroom, because you know, you've already got dozens of people out there. And I just don't think radio is competent to do it.
And yet when the power is out, that's all there is.
Well, I say broadcast radio.
You know, well, maybe because a lot of stations don't have a generator, so they're off the air too. At
Right.
least around here, when Hurricane Rita came through, that was several years ago, my station was one of the very few that was on the air in the area because we had a generator. And
I visited a 50 kilowatt station up in Detroit one time, I don't know, about 10 years or so ago. And it was a brand new installation. And the engineer was showing me the new phasers and transmitter and everything that's out there. And I said, I see there's two things missing. And he says, "What's that?" I said, "First of all, there's no bathroom here." "Oh, well, we're supposed to go down to the Circle K if we have a need." I said, "The other thing, there's no generator in here." He says, "Well, our policy," they were running a Disney format at the time. "Our policy is if the power goes out, the kids will wait." And that's a bigger city. That's a multi-million-dollar operation. And yet the bean counter connection is so tight. Is there anything that radio can do? Anything that the broadcast tech community can do other than endure it as it is? The NAB doesn't want to know about it. The big consolidated companies don't want to know anything about it. The EMs in a lot of places don't want to know about it. So do we just fold our tents and go home?
Haven't both stations already done that?
In effect, yeah.
Oh, that's a good point. And frankly, a lot of this is you go, well, I don't know what more I can do. It's just me. I don't have billions of dollars of, of somebody else's money. It's all mine, whatever I've got. And, the small broadcasters around here, and there's a lot of those in Texas. I think that's one of the reasons I kind of like Texas. There's a bunch of little guys that are mom and pop operations, which is basically what I have. That try real hard to serve their community and do a pretty good job of it. But, the EAS thing is almost just in their way, if nothing else. But there's a ton of people who own radio stations who just plain don't care. The thing's on, they're running the satellite format on the thing. They insert 14 minutes of commercials 4 times an hour. And there's a little bit of programming left. And if you interrupt the commercials with an EAS alert for something, then that just ruins their day. So that's kind of where we are, whether we like it or not.
Well, that's the thrill of automated EAS, whether it be you're doing a live weather report or you're doing a commercial break. When it comes in, it goes out.
Yep, and it interrupts whatever you're doing, which might be something good. You never know. Maybe more useful than knowing that that there's a possible thunderstorm 40 miles away from you.
Mm-hmm.
I have to ask, has WBAP dropped its talk and gone all news?
No, it's talk, but they do have news on it. I mean, it hasn't changed.
Oh, okay, because KRL is the only one.
Well, KRLD is the quote news talk station in the area. And I'm not sure, when I drive to Dallas, I do listen to it mostly for traffic reports. And they're pretty good about that, except they're never right. I'll be right in the middle of a traffic jam and they ignore that particular one and tell you there's one up on LBJ Freeway that's got it all glotted up. I mean, they could probably give the same traffic report every day at the same time, and it would be pretty accurate. So I think that's what they do.
So nobody there is doing all news 24/7.
No, I wouldn't. No, because KRLD does other kinds of short form programming too. So
No.
And there's the caveat.
They've got gardening shows and things like that.
Mr. Wood, Mr. Parker says, just wanted to let you know that in general during oral events here in Alaska, 2 meters is almost useless.
Why is it almost useless? Well, I'm sure there are fewer people driving around.
Well, maybe 6 meters would work better.
Yes, it probably would.
I noticed Mr. Rudman has joined us, I'm happy to say. Richard, if you got your mic up already, tell us a little bit about how you managed to get cooperation from LA County, which I think is probably one of the larger jurisdictional areas.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you how we did it in 1996 and 97. As I was employed by a major all news station in Los Angeles, one of the 2 all news stations in Los Angeles, as a matter of fact, radio stations. We had reporters who kind of helped open the door with communications to both LA City and LA County. And LA County being responsible for the entire region pretty much was to me the most important one to reach out to. I told people that I had an opportunity to meet and learn from some of the best emergency managers in the country. Why did I call them that? It's because they had a lot of practice managing emergencies. Northridge earthquake, the civil unrest issues, various fires and storms and things like that. Going back to the emergency broadcast system days, there was a committee that the Sheriff's Department hosted meetings for, where we talked about EBS even before we got into EAS. That kind of led us to form the local EAS committee and to also continue working with Sheriff's Communications Department, LA County Sheriff's, on this. And it seemed to flow naturally and was a very open and very cooperative relationship, and resulted in us being able to identify a low band VHF frequency that wasn't being used, so they could actually get information out wireless to any station that wanted to have a receiver for low band VHF. So we actually were reinforcing the two identified LP stations, KNX and KFWB, and actually KNX and KFI. That became KFWB was the PEP station at the time and was part of the monitoring assignment, obviously. But I'll tell you the best illustration of this is I was able to work with LA County Office of Emergency Management just before the Y2K event. And we actually had a plan in place to be able to deliver wireless information to every radio and TV station in the Los Angeles market using the LA City TV station, UHF TV station, as a relay vehicle. So that if Y2K had ever been anything more than the fiasco it was, we would have been able to get information to it. And I actually had a 6 foot grid dish for a temporary link so that we could actually get from the county EOC direct to the UHF station studio. And we were able to have that in. Of course, after Y2K, everybody forgot about it and fell apart, but that's another story.
Here's the question I want to ask you. I know that your management supported your efforts in
Yes.
EAS. Did they come to you or did you go to them?
There was still at the time that this all started, the dollars I could invest in hardening KFWB and getting generators were kind of a natural outflow of the culture in Group W, where if you were doing something that was public service and public spirited in the engineering department, you could get it heard and quite often get it done. So as we all know, the management culture in major groups changed, and things went downhill from there.
Yeah.
But it was wonderful while it lasted.
In
Indeed.
Boston, WBZ obviously was Westinghouse, and
Yes.
they were the go-to station in any emergency.
Yeah.
The power outage on the East Coast, I think WBZ was probably one of the only stations that actually had a generator, and people were huddled by their radios listening to BZ. And
Well, BZ had the aux transmitter at Soldiers Field Road at the time, and actually, I had left being a full-time tech at BZ at the time by 1971, but I helped install the Continental 317C that was at the Hull market that made the Westinghouse transmitter the backup transmitter. And there was a lot of attention to RPU and reinforcement and generators. And that was still back when we did weekly tests of everything.
And it was
And,
the last
go-
state in the market to actually have a helicopter.
Yeah.
Go green, green machine.
Yeah, well, the radio system that we put in for Joe Green made him famous. He was
New England and WBZ was the go-to source back in the
Yeah.
1960s. But that was Group W, which I always thought, or Westinghouse, which I always thought was a class operation. But it's
Well-
not that. That's not who owns it anymore. It's horrible what's happened.
well, they had a programming mode they called Storm Center. And basically it was the WBZ version of All Storm all the time.
Uh-huh.
And they had, the news department and the programming department were managed by general managers who gave them not only the permission, but the mandate to do that public service. And it paid off for stations that did that, and listeners returning the favor by continuing to listen after the emergency.
I notice Adrian has joined us too. And Adrian, you've been in the forefront of discussing partial county alerting and the bringing Nevada and California together.
The recent monsoon system we've seen in southern Nevada really tested the partial county alerting effectiveness, and I have to say it's worked well. We now have stations who aren't getting weather activations for communities that are out of their coverage area. So I have to say it's been very effective, and I know Sonoma County, California, Northern California, is coming online with it, and there are several other communities looking at it. So if it gets proposed in your area, it's a good thing. It's definitely worthwhile.
Do you have any areas in Nevada where an NWS is not audible?
Oh yeah, we have a lot of black holes in this state, and what do? They depend on weather service websites at places where internet isn't available, and so it's kind of like the people who live there. They storms are self-announcing. It's situations like fires and earthquakes that are more of concern. And these are communities where people are pretty self-reliant. They aren't waiting for the government to warn them. They know if it's a fire situation. That their situational awareness is very high. So it's kind of like back in the old days.
This is an area we touched a little bit before you got to us. I mentioned that the West Pima County has one radio station in it, and it cannot hear the National Weather Service. It's so far out, 50 miles. And I asked Tim Schott, well, why don't you guys put a transmit? We have no money. Why don't you put up a audio feed that they can pick up? Well, it's a great idea. We'll think about it. And nothing has ever happened.
Well, one of the things that I guess you could do is, and you probably don't have the funding, but the county can put up, or any agency like a tribal agency, you can basically buy a NOAA transmitter. I would think that especially for tribal communities, it would be an ideal opportunity for a federal grant. And tribal agencies have a lot of, it's easier for them to get federal grants than it is for another agency. I don't know why, but that's just been my experience here in Nevada. They get a lot of attention.
But if you put a transmitter up, you still have to get a feed from the closest NWS station, and that's the problem. They don't seem to want to do that.
Again, the transmitters that we put up were able to receive signals in that NOAA daisy chain, so you probably need more than one.
I mean, you'd be better off having a volunteer with a weather radio, feeding that into an internet stream, and then the radio station picks it up. It's just, bizarre.
Well, I know here in East Texas, the NOAA, the NWS sites are fed by fiber, which sounds like a really nice idea until backhoe fade happens, which it did several times. And also when the power goes out, all that fiber stuff still goes through repeaters somewhere along the line to operations center. And when the power goes off there, the internet goes down. And once again, there's nothing. So
all budget fund. Yeah.
Richard?
Problem.
Yes. Adrian and I were both on the California State Committee Zoom that ended a few minutes ago. She beat me here, but I promised I'd come over afterwards. Adrian had developed a list of questions and comments about the relationship of emergency originators and their use of EAS in IPAWS, CAP, EAS, and other things about and management and training and even communication about what they're doing. And she and I are going to work on that list and kind of make bullet points out of it. And I'll circulate it to you, Barry. Also intend to send it out to the list that Gary, Tim, and I created years ago with the state committees, because this all came out of thinking about what happened in Maui, and that even to a greater degree that the wildfires triggered action in California that got the state legislature to help us reestablish communications with Cal OES. Maui is going to have, I think, a nationwide impact on looking at alert and warning that I think is going to be important.
Do you think there's anything the FCC could do for us?
No. I think we're going to have to show some leadership here. All the FCC cares about administratively is whether they can get out the national stuff. They don't even care about having local plans or local committees or anything at the local level. I mean, Adrian and I just were on the Zoom call, and Sarah, one of the Cal OES people, was on a call that we had with Washington not too long ago, and they're not interested in anything we put in a written plan that helps our local EAS participants figure out what they're supposed to do. All they care about really is what we put into the ETRS thing, so they can figure out what the monitoring assignments are, so enforcement can issue pink tickets if they find something at variance. And after creating a database that we can't even look at.
That's not a bad thing, in that we don't need the FCC to tell us, here on a local level, state level, we don't need them telling us what to do or what we need or
I'm very happy it's settled this way because it leaves us the ability to be able to chart our own future on this, ask our own questions, and try to get to a better place with this. And again, there's some things that can be managed best from top down. This is something that's best managed from bottom up, and we're at the bottom.
There's a thing that's going on. There are a couple of YouTube channels that are petitioning the FCC about ATSC3 encryption. And apparently they've gotten thousands of people to join the petition, and the commission has responded by agreeing to discuss it. Maybe that's a way. One is the Antenna Man, and the other is Lawn TV, and they're pushing very hard to make encryption illegal, or at least illegal on the main channel. Yeah, sub channels may be not a problem, but having the grassroots petition the FCC, it's going to take someone to inspire them to do that.
Well, there needs to be a desire, not just inspiration, but a desire. And the problem that, again, let's look at it from the standpoint of someone working at the FCC. Part 11 is a mess. It's been a mess. It has been promised to be cleaned up for a dozen years. On the other hand, you realize that this is something being imposed upon broadcasters who years ago accepted it as part of their commission to serve the public. But they're stuck with the problem of emergency managers that don't want to cooperate, and the fact that there's not enough people to take over when there was automation all the time. I mean, I suppose if you passed a rule that said that any station that had a major fire warning and the station didn't broadcast it, the manager would be put in stocks for a week. Maybe that would create something. But the reality is that if you look at it from the point of view of the FCC, what can they do? They're told by Congress what they have to do, but what can they do?
Well, the only stocks that are going to be put in are on Wall Street.
Yeah. I've spoken to a number of the folks there, as has Richard, as has Adrian, and some others. And the level of desire to cooperate comes and goes. I think one of the things that may this year be a slight improvement is that you now have more than 8 hours to file Form 2. Having 20,000 stations and cable systems all trying to hit the FCC server in that 8-hour span. Every year, oh, we've got it covered. Oh, yeah, we've got sufficient contractors promising us that there's capacity. And every year it's a disaster. Even this year, Form 1 back in January, they had to extend that for another month or more. And sometimes, it'd be nice to have the folks that are behind these forms on the websites reach out to people that actually work in the industry and understand that a contract engineer trying to do 20 stations is really at a disadvantage. And when you suddenly change and say, well, we want your lat lawn in digital format, that really is confusing to a lot of GMs and people that are not technically oriented.